Okay, I think we'll get started. Thanks, folks, for coming for one of the, I think, the second last session of our GIS Managers track, newly introduced this year. So, thanks to Adam Carno on the left here for more or less organizing this whole sessions. I think it's really been a great introduction to the user conference proceedings. So, thanks to him, and another one after this that I'm sure will be just as good. So, hang tight. So, just as a bit of an introduction, my name is Matt Lewin. I'm the practice manager for management consulting at Esri Canada. I'm based out of the Calgary office. And the practice was started a few years ago, and it really with the mandate to start to help our customers devise strategies, put together plans, and really get more out of their investment as it pertains to GIS. And so through the work that we've been doing, we've really been taking a holistic approach to how we look at a customer's overall geospatial capability. We look at their technology, we look at their data, we look at their business needs, we look at their people and process. But one thing that comes up over and over again is governance, something that perhaps is not necessarily well understood, or awareness is a bit lacking in our field of GIS over the years. But it does come up time to time as something that people feel is quite important, but is not necessarily well understood. And there isn't really a good sense of how to move forward and implement a framework or a model for governing your GIS investment in your organization. So sorry, skipped ahead. So today what we're going to do is I'm just going to hopefully take a bit of the mystique out of governance. That's the intention. If you come away and learning a little something about what it is, what it means, and how specifically it pertains to GIS, I think we'll be a success. So I'll go through, I'll talk a bit about the definition of what it's all about, how it pertains to GIS specifically, a bit about why it's important, what are the benefits of governance in your organizations, and as well a little bit of a practical approach to implementing governance using a framework that we've been working on for the last couple of years. So first things first then, let's start beginning. What is governance, just generally speaking? So I think when people hear that word, they think of a few things, but the main thing I like to think of it is as a system of control, okay? So we talk at Esri a lot about systems, right? Systems of record. We talk about systems of insight, systems of engagement, systems of systems. Well, let's throw another one in there, right? We'll call it the system of control. And that ultimately is what your governance program is all about, is about control. Not control in a bad way or an authoritarian kind of a way, but in a way that is really an enabler of everything you're trying to do in terms of delivering GIS back to your business. So it refers to, and these are some of the concepts that are key to governance. It talks about leadership and guidance. Okay? It really is about guiding the actions and decisions that you're going to be making regarding your GIS, and that spans your technology and data, that spans your people, your processes, your money, and your funding. It's about authority and accountability. Again, not in an onerous way, but it's really about establishing ownership and responsibility for each of those core areas over your GIS. It's about decisions and decision rights, so determining what are priorities that need to be made in regards to your GIS and who should be making those decisions. It's about collaboration. That's why I say it's not a big onerous authoritarian thing. It is about bringing together stakeholders from across your organization to work together to make good decisions and get more out of your investment. And then finally, business alignment. That's ultimately what governance is. It is about aligning what your GIS provides to what your business needs. Hopefully that's clear as mud. So if that's what governance is in general, what is it specifically when it comes to GIS? So the main message here is that GIS is an IT, right? It is an information technology. It's also a capability. It's also there's also knowledge on how to use and get the most out of GIS. It's also about location intelligence. But it certainly does fall under that kind of overall information and technology governance area, okay? So what I like to think of as more like a subset of IT governance. And I'll read a couple of definitions there, and you can take them away and think about them. But IT governance from Gartner, and there's many other definitions, but they all kind of sound the same. It says it's the process, and that's underlined for a reason, It's processes that ensure efficient, effective use of information technology in enabling an organization to achieve its business goals. Okay? So process is maybe the key word in there. Process, meaning it's something you do. It's something that you do ongoing. It's not a one-time exercise. It's not a bunch of committees that meet once a year or every 2 years and never meet again, right? It is an active, ongoing process that you do at your business. GIS governance, then, is part of that IT governance. But the way I like to think of it is it's something that augments your overall IT governance program with more specific processes and decision structures to optimize the alignment between your organization's GIS and your business objectives. Okay? So it's really just adding that geospatial component and flavor to what you're doing in terms of your overall IT governance. And it doesn't necessarily stop there, because governance, again, is a big, broad topic. We talk about IT governance as being one major factor that's going to influence GIS governance, right? We have, and some of the organizations that probably are here today are already doing some of this and have adopted some of these frameworks. You might have heard of COBIT or Val IT and Risk IT, which are precursors to the COBIT governance framework. The point of IT governance is to define an IT strategy, define architectural standards, define service standards, service level standards. All that is going to influence and be factored into your governance program at the GIS level. Likewise, information governance might already exist within your organization. You know, we might already have corporate information standards relating to security, to data privacy, to stewardship, to policies, right? Those are going to influence your GIS governance program as well. And up above that, there's corporate governance, right? The overall rules, policies that govern how your company or how your organization manages its risk overall. Those are going to influence your IT, your information, and thus your GIS. So there's a lot to consider when you just go out and say, hey, we need governance for GIS. You're going to start to think about, okay, well, what are we doing already in these other areas? So if we know what it is, we know what governance is, generally speaking, how it relates to GIS. So then why bother? Right? Like really, what's really so important about governance anyway? And I think, excuse me, one of the best ways to think about what happens is, what if you don't have governance? Look at it the other way. If you lack any type of governance, and it isn't just because you even call it governance and you don't have a program or you don't have a committee set up, you're probably doing some level of governance already, just informally. And a lot of organizations I work with in consulting are doing it that way. They don't know to call it governance, but they're doing something. But when there's somewhat of a lack of an effective governance in place, you start to see a lot of these kind of common characteristics show up. And there's a few of them listed there on the screen for you. Things like redundant technologies and data sets, right? Legacy technology. This is a governance problem, right? Things like duplicate software and data purchases. That is a governance problem. Who's doing that? Who, by show of hands, who has ever encountered buying the same software or data more than once, right? So guys, somebody's waving their hand twice, yeah. Obviously, right? This is a major governance problem that always is common across the industry. Underutilized technology investments. I'm just picking a few from this list, but that means you've overspent, or you have not gone out and understood the needs of the business well enough to map them back to what you spent your money on in terms of your software, your data, and everything else, right? That's a governance problem. Lack of executive awareness. That is a huge governance problem, especially the larger and more complex of an organization you get. If you're hearing, I just don't care, I don't know what GIS, why are we spending money on this? Why am I hiring new people? Why do you need training? Why do you need to come to the Esri user conference? That's governance. So, you can factor this all in, but a lot of this comes into how you essentially align what your GIS program delivers to what your business objectives are. And that's what governance is really all about. I'm going to say governance probably 1,000 times, by the way, in this presentation. I haven't come up with a better word that can double. But more specifically, the purpose of governance is represented in this little triangle graphic here. At the bottom, it really is about processes. Like, it's something you do. right? It's about establishing goals, metrics for performance management, defining some key activities, roles, responsibilities, policies. These drive business outcomes related to accountability, improved compliance, improved oversight, improved issue resolution, and others. And ultimately, it drives stakeholder value, right? And that stakeholder value is coming up with an optimal balance between the benefits realized by the business, the risks that you're trying to mitigate, and the use and optimization of your resources. Okay, that's the stakeholder value. So your governance, all these processes you're putting in place, all these decision matrices that you would identify, they're all there to drive that kind of triple top bottom line concept of benefits, risk, and resources. Something that's important to note, though, is that some people here might be thinking, well, you know, we're kind of doing that. Isn't that what management is all about? I'm a GIS manager. I do a lot of this, or I do some of it anyway. And the answer is no, not really. There's something quite distinct about what governance is and what management is. And if you think about it, it's kind of the comparisons there are on the screen. But again, governance being about direction and leadership, it's really about establishing a strategy and setting the direction forward, as opposed to the management function, which is essentially executing according to what the strategy is telling us. Right? It's about affecting a change on the organization, hopefully positive one, as opposed to managing the complexity of that change that you're imposing. It's about defining goals, key performance indicators, key decisions, etc., as opposed to planning, building, and running those programs to align with what those KPIs are. And ultimately, management is about doing things right. If you can remember one thing, governance is about doing the right things. That's the distinction between are we governing or are we managing? You can make a little bit of a criteria there, and you'll see, like, okay, we're missing one or the other. Management is still very important, obviously, though. This is called the GIS Manager's Track for a reason. It's a fundamental part of this. And likely the governing side of it will fall on a lot of folks here to actually tackle. You know, it's not uncommon to see someone in a GIS manager role or that level to actually lead up in a governance effort. But you won't go it alone. And you certainly need some level of leadership support to get you where you need to go. And so, you know, some of the challenges that we see in our work with governance, why is it that in GIS circles it's still somewhat of an ambiguous thing or maybe a lack of focus on it? And some of definitely in customers I've talked to, they've told me that it's just not understood well. That's kind of what we're trying to do here, is make it a little bit better understood in terms of a value proposition and, you know, a definition. Say some that have governance say there's just a lack of attention to doing the job of governing. It often gets set up as a program or set up as a bunch of committees and forgotten about, or meet once a year and everybody kind of forgets who was involved, or somebody's gone. Or the person who ran and had the energy, was the leader of that program, is no longer with us, and it kind of falls flat. So certainly the ongoing side of governance is as important as setting it up in the first place. It's also, as I said, it kind of gets lumped into IT governance at times. And sometimes that's okay. If you're small enough and you have a small enough environment and small enough business needs, you can probably do a decent job of just paying attention to GIS a little bit more closely, considering some of the unique sides of the GIS environment, whether it's the technology or the skills that you need or the data that you manage. It sounds like it's bureaucratic. It has the word govern in it, which means government, which means it's not a lot of fun and a lot of rules and a lot of process. It's going to make my life miserable, right? Again, a badly designed governance program can do all those things. So we want to do something that is actually an enabler, not a barrier to getting work done. And again, I already mentioned this, but a bit of confusion over what governing is and what managing is. But the benefits of governance are huge. You know, we go back to that list we have. You can address these to some extent by putting in some process and structure, right? You can get better technology alignment. With some focus, you can increase the profile of GIS within your organization, get those leaders to be a part of what you're doing, get them engaged, break down those silos across the departments, improve compliance, especially if you're in a heavily regulated industry where data compliance sharing, data privacy, these things are paramount. Governing is really important here. So having a structured approach to governance can really improve your compliance requirements. And on and on. Okay, so there's lots of great benefits here. It's not going to produce you a great map at the end of the day. This is not for the solution-heavy folks. This is something that you're trying to do is make their jobs easier and make good decisions about what you're doing in the future. And then, sort of the last part of this section is that this is part of a bigger picture. Governance, what we're trying to encourage in the consulting work that I do a lot of is GIS. We always think of it as a technology, as a solution, and it is, but it's much more than that when you think about it. I think of it as more of a capability, a geospatial capability, right? And that includes what we all know and love in terms of the software, the infrastructure, and the data, but it includes the people, the competencies, the skills, and knowledge that are required to use it. It includes the processes, whether it's your service management, your communications, your change management, and it includes governance. So it's that kind of fourth pillar of what you need to focus on and build if you want to run a robust, well-oiled GIS machine. Okay, so we talked a bit about sort of what governance is. We talked about why it's important, how it's different from managing, benefits. What I wanted to do now, turn it to sort of the second part of this presentation, is a little bit on implementing governance. So this is all good. You got a bit of a structure in your head around what it's all about, what it means. What we've been doing in the last couple of years is really working with some organizations to nail down an approach to delivering a governance model that I think can scale well, can scale to a small size to supporting a very large organization if needed. Something that was robust enough that really focused on what were the most important areas of running a GIS programming. What do you need to govern, essentially? So I'll take you through that right now, a bit of the framework, a bit on the design approach, a made-up example, semi-made up, it'll look familiar to a lot of you folks, and give you an example of how you might tackle this, what is admittedly a challenging task. So the framework that we've started to work on here has 6 core components, 6 domains, you can call them. And we did a lot of research into different frameworks, IT and information. And one of the things that really stood out is that it is really boiled down to making decisions. So you have to figure out what are the major pillars or major areas that you need to make decisions about, particularly strategic decisions, on a daily, a quarterly, or yearly basis, or even more far out there. And so what we landed on here were really these 6 core domains that are represented in the graphic. So we have the strategy, okay? And that's comprised of your vision, your strategic plan, stakeholder management, engagement, organization structure, and innovation, okay? What I mean by that is you need to govern those areas. There's a process that it's important that governing is about making decisions, and ongoing decisions and monitoring and performance measuring at those levels is what's important, okay? In the platform area, it's your technology architecture, your solution portfolio, access, including who has access to what software, to what systems, to what solutions, and performance in terms of technical performance. That can cover, these are broad categories, but these are major areas that you can define within your governance program as priorities for you to govern. There's data, of course. That includes your data architecture itself. This can go department-based, this can be corporate-wide. This is the usage standards, your stewardship, which includes ownership, custodianship, roles, responsibilities around who has what access to data, and data quality, of course. There's your workforce. That's your training and development of your people. That's talent management. That means recruiting, attracting, retaining staff, and partnerships, right? Part of the talent portfolio or workforce portfolio might not be those people who work directly with or directly as staff, but they could be contractors, they could be interns, they could be partners with other businesses, academic institutions, so they form part of your overall workforce complement as well. Governing that and making sure that you're getting the most out of that investment is important as well. There's your delivery, that's your senior service management, This is about communication, change, outreach. So that's proactively reaching out to your customers or to your, if you're in public sector, to your residents, to businesses. And then finally, the investment. Now, it all boils down ultimately to investment when it comes to governing. At some point, this all rolls up to decisions that need money, that need funding, that cost something. And so how you prioritize what you're going to spend your money on, right? How you're going to optimize how you procure, all fall under this domain of investment governance. So that's the framework, okay? That's just a way to get your head around all the areas of governance, right? The domains that you're going to go and look at. The trick, though, is how do you take that and make something useful for your organization? How do you go from kind of an abstract concept to a working model, a governance? That's what we'll term or define as being a governance model. That's a working operating function based on this framework. And so to do this, you're typically going to need to build and devise two things, okay? We have our decision structure, and we'll get to that in a second. I'm going to take you through an example of that. And your governance processes. And so that's going to be related to the framework itself. And the trick here is defining the structure and then assigning processes to that structure, to the different groups, committees, working groups that comprise your governance team. So to do this, we follow a little bit of a design approach. This is actually derived, sort of similar from an IBM methodology related to operational IT governance. Massaged a little bit, I think, to focus and take out some of the stuff that may be a little bit extraneous. But it's generally this two-step process is a standard process for defining any kind of governance model. And it's really driven with two steps, okay? The first one is defining your priorities. Because that's one of the main things is, of course, it can be an arduous undertaking to try to implement that entire framework in the first go, right? It's going to be too much, especially if you're coming from nothing. So what we need to do here is define the priorities by looking first to kind of focus and scope down the governance program to just its necessary parts to start with, okay? And so you do that by looking at your business drivers that we've talked about a couple slides ago, but looking at the business drivers, those are going to give you their governance concerns. Excuse me. With that in mind, then you can develop your governance solution, okay? And that's, as I said, is comprised of your decision structure and your processes that are assigned into that structure. Hope you're still with me on this. There's a lot going on, but I think the two, just remember the kind of the two-step process of defining priorities, devising a solution, okay? So I'll take you through a real quick example here. We've been working with a few organizations on this approach, and it's proved to be reasonably successful to start. But I'll play out the scenario for you. It's probably pretty familiar to a lot of you. And again, it's no one in particular, but it's everybody as well. So this scenario will give you, we'll walk through the process of actually devising the governance model. In this example, we have a sort of imagine a mid-sized North American city, and they're working on transforming their public service delivery through a digital transformation program. A lot of you are going through that right now, looking at how you're delivering your services using digital tools, whether it's GIS, whether it's mobile, whether it's big data, real time, but changing how service delivery to the community is provided through digital technology. They're a long-standing user of GIS, okay? So they use it for traditional types of GIS. That's their history, is mostly production mapping and data management, primarily your asset management program, public works, bid and traffic, and transportation. And as things have gone on, as technology has changed, as they've gone through this digital transformation, they're starting to see a lot of need for new tools, whether it's feature extraction for the property survey department, whether it's mobile data collection into the public works area, open data mandate to provide data back to the community, Advanced location analytics, this could be from any group really, but we see it a lot in public health, we see it in police services. And again, this is just an example in a city government. This applies across this kind of situation of digital transformation is common in many industries. So the key question that they had was, how do we establish the governance required to support the growing demand for GIS and enable our transformation strategy, right? Pretty basic. I mean, how on earth do we actually keep up and support this? What do we need to do? They needed some governance, they figured. So what was done was to first run through a bit of a needs assessment, or at least a situational analysis of what are the major challenges that they've uncovered. To get to those business drivers, if we go back to our design approach, first thing was, what are the key drivers here? That's going to help us get to our governance priorities. So there's a few of them listed. Lack of an articulated GIS strategy. They didn't have a strategy, not documented anyway. Didn't have a vision. Maybe some plans, maybe some project plans that have been set in motion, but no actual long-term roadmap, 3, 4, 5 years saying, here's where we want to be. There was a very limited understanding of their business needs, which is kind of surprising, but obviously sometimes not. They had maybe an understanding of public works, maybe asset management, but a lot of the other groups that could be great users and advocates for GIS, needs were just unknown. They felt they had an effective org structure, but had a traditional model of a GIS department in IT, a manager, a couple BAs, a BA, hopefully, developer or two, a DBA, and then some GIS analysts running maps. Overburden of legacy applications. Again, it's kind of back to what we talked about, but many, what we call this kind of technical debt concept, where difficulty moving forward and responding to new needs because they're so busy supporting all the old technology, right? Who has that issue here? Yeah. Everybody, just about. That's one of the classic cases why when governance kind of opportunity comes to us, that's one of the first things that always comes up. We've got so many apps, not just GIS, but everything related that might integrate with it, or databases that are supporting it. And we're stuck. We can't get off. Nobody has the will to move. We want to upgrade. We want to retire some things. We have to convince one business unit to move off. They don't want to. And so you're stuck. And you have that concept of technical debt. You're burdened by this debt that won't allow you to move forward. Anyway, and on, right? Many different challenges. But this was done through a kind of a needs assessment, okay? And that's often how this would go. Sometimes you can do it yourself. You could have a consultant come in and run through this. But what you're looking for here are sort of the major drivers, the major business drivers that are kind of impacting or impeding your progress. So what then that does is the process, and there's a process to doing this part. It doesn't just magically appear on a slide with stars beside it, but it does in this presentation. What you would do then is look at what those challenges and drivers were, and look at which are these priority areas in the little framework that you think, we need to build our program around these, in this case, 8 governance domains or processes is what they are, okay? So in this one, it mapped fairly well to the strategic plan. They didn't have one, as I mentioned. That's an obvious sign of a lack of governance. You don't have a strategic plan at all, right? Or at least not one that's kind of understood and shared and hopefully documented. Stakeholder management, org structure, solution portfolio, data stewardship, training and development, outreach, procurement. Okay? So with those priorities then defined, it's now, okay, well, now let's devise our solution. We understand where we want to focus. We don't want to tackle all of this governance stuff all at once. It's going to be too much and too difficult. We want to focus on those 8 areas. Hey, maybe we'll start with 4 of them, in fact. We'll just start with, strategic plan, change our org structure a bit, work on our workforce and some of our technical challenges as well. So the next step is to look at your decision structure. So now you're going to say, okay, we're focused on these governance priorities. Let's now look at what is a good structure for how we should establish the roles and responsibilities and people and relationships that are going to be part of this program. And there is no easy way to do this. This is something that is really a bit of an art and takes a lot of, feedback. I have to consider the culture of where you work, what your organization is about. Some love top-down hierarchies, some love very flat organizations. Some people want to be involved in all aspects of governance, some want to focus. In this case, it was a bit of all of the above, okay? So in this case, we established a structure similar to what you see on the screen, okay? At the heart of this structure is those working groups. And there's three in this case: the technology working group, this has some generic names for this presentation, data working group, and operations working group. And these groups are really focused around those domains. We organize these working groups around those domains in the framework. So for example, the technology working group was responsible for the technology, or the processes under that technology pillar, domain. The data working group, obviously, for the data. The operations for the delivery and for the workforce management. Really, because the reason was, a lot of the roles and responsibilities of people fall nicely into those areas. We have some people that were focused more on the technology side, more on the data management, data architecture, database administration, and then operations. These were your operations leads, your GIS leads who are doing a lot of the hiring, a lot of the approval of training, development, as well as responsible for the delivery of services back to the business as well. So it broke out nicely along those lines. Doesn't have to be done this way, by the way, but this case is factored this way. Above them, then, of course, is our Strategic Advisory Committee, okay? This was comprised of, primarily as a business approval mechanism. So those working groups are really working there as kind of recommendations engines, maybe making some decisions in certain level, tactical level decisions, but when it became something that ultimately requires some business level approval, might require some funding, it has to be more of like a recommendation support to this group at the strategic advisory level. And that group there was comprised of their managers from the GIS, the director of IT, as well as key sort of director or line managers from their key business stakeholder departments. And as I said, the recommendations were being fed through those working groups to the advisory committee to make decisions on, as well as to own the strategy and investment sides of the pillars of the governance program as well. And as I said before, this doesn't exist in isolation, GIS. Like a lot of places, they already had a fairly robust IT approval mechanism, portfolio management mechanism in place. So in their case, they had an IT review board, which makes overall citywide IT investment decisions that require operational or capital funding. Okay, so this ultimately is passed on through to that group to make the actual formal approval. At the bottom, though, is something I should point out, is something called initiative teams too. As I said, we want this not to be a siloed we don't want to encourage silos, I guess is what it is. It's already one of the things you want to do in governance is to overcome that. So your initiative teams can really help with that as well. These are really collaborative breakout groups that might exist for a temporary period of time when you want to investigate and research, say, a new tool, a new solution, a cross-department opportunity, so new data management practices, okay? Best to pull those folks from the component groups and the component business and have a kind of a temporary team that will be, again, a recommendation engine, sort of like the standing groups are, but really focused on something that's more of a temporary need that you need to have a lot of collaboration on. And they found this to be quite effective. So with that structure, the thing now is, okay, we have 8 processes, we've got a structure, we've got to assign these processes. What do they look like? What are they going to do? Like, it's great we've got a structure, we've got the process. Like, what are these actual groups going to actually go out there and operate on and actually exist to do? So the idea now, the process is going through each of these different processes and defining them in a way and assigning them to the different groups so that you're really looking at the right, have the right things to manage and govern, okay? So I'll take you through a little quick example of the strategic plan process here. So the process, each element of a governance process is more or less defined like this. There's about, 7, 8 7 different components to what you want to agree on, factor in. There's obviously your objectives, so you want to write out a nice objective of what you're trying to accomplish through this process. You want to identify any particular controls that you're going to require to be produced. Again, this is a process, so it's going to be something that's going to deliver something, whether it's a policy, a set of procedures, a set of standards or documents. These are going to be identified at this process. In a strategic plan, for example, the plan itself is one of the controls, right? That's what you need to produce. There's your set of decision rights. This is typically formed as some kind of RACI matrix that identifies the various committees, working groups, initiative teams, and others, and their level of accountability and responsibility for this process. There's the key decisions that you need to focus on. That's kind of whether it's at the planning stage, whether it's at the ongoing monitoring stage. There's the inputs. A lot of what you do are going to be influenced, as I said, by other levels of governance or other corporate documents. So consider those. The key activities that you need to tackle, and the measures. Being a process, you want to measure if you're doing a good job. You want to know if, again, in your strategic plan, if your plan is actually delivering what you said it would, that the objectives are being met, that your value is being created. So having key measures and then ongoing monitoring them is part of your governance process. So on a simple kind of governance on a page look for one of these aspects, this strategic plan, you might lay it out something like this. And you see here it has broken down into the objectives, the controls, over the planning and implementation side, which is looking at the key decisions, inputs, and activities, as well as the monitoring, which is around your measures and KPIs. And then, of course, there's your RACI with the various component groups identified in this example. So this is really just a way to document and make sure you're covering off everything that you're going to actually perform in your governance model. Some key considerations, though, when you're doing this. Again, it sounds all glorious, right? Just pick out a couple of processes, write up write them up, and you're done. No, the trick is actually now taking this and moving it forward, right? The actual putting this into action is the hard part. So some key considerations when you are taking this step forward with governance or taking your program and kind of improving it, to think about probably 4 important things. Leadership involvement. Again, I said before, executive awareness was one of the big challenges. Getting your leadership involved in governance at some level is critical. And I think it is probably a direct correlation between the success of that program and how involved they are. Doesn't mean they have to become, developers or GIS analysts overnight or anything like that, but they have to have a sense of why this governance program exists, why GIS, what the value is, and become advocates for this program. So the more you can do to sell them on the importance and get them actively engaged in this governance, the better off you'll be. Another consideration that's related is committee fatigue. I do see that a lot, especially if you're in the public sector. Everybody's on a committee, or 1 or 2 or 10. The higher up you go, the more committees you sit on, and the last thing you want to do is sit on yet another committee, right? So just be aware of that, I guess, is what I can say. At some point, you might have to try to do a bit of convincing. But one thing that really helps is if there is a champion, and it might be at the GI folks here, to be the energy to continuously sell and promote and move forward the activities that the governance program is there to move. But don't try to make the committees an overburden to everybody else's actual jobs. The second is the redundant governance. As I said, make sure that when you're setting these up, you're not already doing a lot of this. You might have, hopefully you're aware of what it is, but there might already be mechanisms in place for certain programs. Certainly at some organizations I work with, they already have a bit of a flavor of this. They have a design authority, for example, when it comes to managing the solution portfolio, or data and database design kind of architectural decisions. So it's managed by what they call a design authority. Or they have an operations team, which is essentially doing workforce planning. So you can essentially incorporate those into the governance program is one good tactic. Just, you don't have to disrupt the cart and create a whole new area. It's more like just recognizing it and perhaps augmenting it with some additional processes and activities. And the other thing is the overreach. Again, make sure you have the actual authority to do what you're saying you're going to do when you set up your teams. I've seen a lot of governance teams get established that are, have minimal influence. Even I think when they get together and they're like-minded folks and they didn't bring in people from other departments, or they didn't have enough leadership involvement, and then they went out there with their recommendations or plans and they got shut down right away because they didn't necessarily have the influence that they maybe thought they did. So it's important to recognize where your influence is coming on, who are the key influencers to be involved with, get them involved, make sure you are going to be successful in what you're doing. So, just to sum up, a few key points that we talked about. We talked about what governance is. We talked about why I do it. We talked about why it's not management. Went through a bit of a design approach and how to implement. Move yourselves forward with what is, I think, a very valuable program if you can get it accomplished. Governance is about decisions and decision making. Okay, that's what it's all about making decisions and then have the who and the how to make those decisions. That's what you're really going for here. Having a understood method for making decisions on your GIS. Design a decision structure that reflects the level of accountability, promotes collaboration. Again, try to avoid being overly authoritarian. Try to be collaborative. Promote that through your program. Make sure you continuously promote or recognize that governance is an ongoing concern. It's a process. It's something you do. It's not a one-time thing. Establish those processes that drive ongoing governance. Commit to executing them. Right? So again, it's a process, so make sure they're established, they're understood, commit. Be sure to align other governance programs, again, IT, information management, corporate management. Don't do it all at once. Especially don't try to say, oh, we're going to implement all, 25 of these processes or something and hope to be successful. Prioritize, right? Start somewhere. But that's the main thing. Get started on it if you're going to. And if you have started, keep going, because it's, the more you do, the more involvement you get, the more value you start to see. It kind of builds on itself. You recognize that, without governance in the past, why didn't we do this years ago? You keep hearing all that. So I'll just stop there. Say thanks for listening today. If you want to know more, feel free to email me, or I do have some articles that we've been posting on our blog site. There's a few of them there in the link. You can find them on esri.ca. There's other topics too that we do discuss in terms of strategic planning and related types of things, but those are a few that are there for governance. So with that, thanks for watching. Thanks for having me, and I'll open up to Q&A. Yes, we have a question over here. So the question was, how important is it to have your IT governance set up before you do your GIS governance? That's a really good question, because I've seen both situations where it's set up and it's kind of forced to align, or there is no real IT governance, but folks have gone ahead and started to put some GIS governance in place. I think what's more important is that if you are lacking IT governance at all, it's important, maybe even more important than ever, to get your IT group involved in your GIS governance development program. So, as I said, I've noticed that they might not have adopted a particular standard or framework, it might not be a COBIT shop or Val IT or anything like that, but they're probably doing some level of governance informally, right? There might be some standards at the data level that have been, or some infrastructure level standards that have been adopted. So there's some level of governance, it's just not called that. So what I would say is important to get them involved in your first efforts to make sure that their consideration of the IT governance direction is a part of what you're going to do. Sorry, I just missed the last part.
An organization. Have you examples of clients that have an IT department that do not want GIS at the organization?
At all.
At all.
So, sorry, the question, I'll repeat the question. The question was, have I worked with any customers or organizations that the IT department doesn't want any GIS at the organization? Not so severe, no, I would say. I would say though that I've worked with plenty that the IT don't want much to do with GIS. Like, that's really common. Well, because, you know, to be frank, I've worked in IT, and they just want to basically support the infrastructure, the OS, the data level, their tier, basically, if you're talking about an IT tiered system, and everything above that is left to the GIS folks. So they don't want any responsibility for the app servers, for the data management side of things, for the use, for the business requirements or anything. So I'd say in that regard, GIS governance is actually more important than ever, because now you're dealing with basically almost what a service provider type of IT organization would be. So kind of half answered your question there, but no, I don't know any that said we don't want any GIS. Do you have, can you elaborate on that a bit? Is there anything? Maybe we could talk after, because I'd be interested to hear what that story, a little deeper on that. At the back.
Do you ever recommend modifying or creating
Yeah, so the question was, do I recommend codifying or memorandums of understanding amongst different departments, I guess, that might have different... Yeah, so not included in here is kind of what you would you might put in place once you start to actually implement and roll out your governance program. So things like MOUs, terms of reference, a charter, sharing agreements. If you're not in a kind of an open data kind of world where you're doing, yeah, these are actually part of kind of formalizing that structure. You know, if you have, and again, it depends, it's organization dependent, but some places it's very clear what will be provided and what participation levels will be. So kind of the next step, and maybe we can do another presentation in the future on that, which is rolling one of these out and all the complexity. But yeah, definitely that can be a part of what you do when you implement your governance program. So I'll try to paraphrase what you said. So you have a situation where your IT governance and GIS governance programs are essentially merging, because the IT, I suppose both sides feel it'd be more efficient to, govern GIS as part of the IT portfolio. Is that generally what? Yeah. It's not wrong. It just depends. I think it depends kind of the maturity of your IT, of your organization. If you've got, I think, a lot of what happens is, the problem is that they have IT governance, but it just overlooks GIS. It's a line item on a budget. I've seen that before. It's GIS for X number of dollars, and it can be halved at just a stroke of a pen. It happens all the time. Yeah. Well, I've seen it actually in a positive. I've seen one place where it was a positive, to be honest, because I think like it was because the GIS and IT groups had been working separately like that, governing separately for some time. And over time, I think, opposite of what the gentleman over here said, they became much more of a mature organization in terms of how they use GIS. So they recognized it as a larger kind of enabler of their overall IT. So they had a lot of integration amongst their systems and other IT systems. They had a lot of other users that were non-traditional GIS users coming in the mix, or on the IT side supporting it. So if that does happen, that might actually be a good case to start to roll them into the same program. So the reason that I put that point there is that it's more for those folks that are maybe a step behind where you are, which was there's IT governance and they don't care about GIS and it doesn't get any kind of spotlight or awareness going. So that's one of the challenges, is that maybe this is an opportunity to put in a kind of a actual unique GIS governance program. But if you're going the other direction, so your question, for again paraphrasing, is that you had governance basically around an killer app, as you said. That's where it started, I guess you could say, but now how do you evolve that perhaps to include a bigger, broader sense of GIS? Yeah, no, I think that's again, start with what you've got. Start with those priorities again. Look at what are some of the areas that you would like to bring in. And yeah, the same folks might be the same groups that end up formalizing this new structure, right? But if you say, look, maybe we need to actually start thinking about some focused expertise around our workforce, move some people into our technology domain, like start to put some structure around that, start to think about this kind of recommendation process and this approval process, and say, you know, look, GIS to us used to mean this killer app, but actually it's more of a capability overall, and includes many solutions, apps, skills, people, process. So let's start to break down or structure ourselves along those lines, as opposed to kind of what is, you know, currently our one app kind of structured approach, I would say. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much.